What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Joining me once again is the one and only Mike Wahle, former Packers and Panthers guard / tackle and everything else. He is a film breakdown extraordinaire, former offensive lineman, process to perform expert. Mike, it is great to have you back. Thanks again for joining me.
Oh, thanks as always for having me, man. Love talking ball with you.
Yeah, right back at you. Well, a fun week. Of course, anytime Packers beat the Bears, that is a fun week. We're sort of navigating this crazy time where everyone in the NBA and NHL and NFL is fighting through all the COVID protocols and everything that's going through that. I don't think we want to jump into that too much because it's not exactly the most fun conversation in the world to have, but certainly something that everyone's very cognizant at this moment. But we, again, coming off a Bears win, I want to talk to you about something. We always have to start in the trenches, right? I feel like it's just it's something we have to do when we have Mike Wahle in the program. But Matt LaFleur went out of his way to sort of mention Royce Newman in the game that he had this past week, stating, I believe his quote was that it was his best game of the season. What did you see out of Royce in the trenches? And was this a big step for him?
Well, I think, we always have to put things in context. So obviously the last time they stepped on the field, they were playing against Aaron Donald, right? So competition does matter.
Yeah.
The guys that, quite frankly, that Royce has a lot of great qualities. Royce is going to be a good player in this league. I mean, the guy's playing as a rookie. I mean, you just think about really the gravity of he's playing as a rookie, and we don't really have to talk about him that much because he's doing a nice job. He's not the most physical guy in the world. There's some things that he's going to be able to develop from a physical standpoint. I'm talking about his body structure, his body armor that's going to help him, become a better player later on. His mindset, hopefully, what changes and a little bit becomes more of a finisher, more of an enforcer. But he's doing an incredibly good job right now, especially in this last game, of playing with his arms extended, getting that defensive player away from him, staying square initially, as far as with respect to the center, the right tackle, and just making sure that spacing and that structure is sound so that pass off games with these guys. We call that lane discipline, maybe an easier way to say it. I think in general, his technique is improving. You see a lot of the young offensive linemen come into the league now. And what do? They want to get in close and they kind of want to wrestle with these guys. Any good defensive line coach is going to tell you that they want their defensive linemen to smell the breath of the offensive lineman before they make their move. Meaning they want to attack elbows and they want to attack armpits because now I can't recover with my feet. I think Royce is very gifted in the sense that he has good feet. He plays with a good base. He continually moves his feet, but he's starting now to play with his arms more extended. It's much easier to do this week than it was against Aaron Donald. Like these guys, the guys that he played against this week, they're all NFL players. So with respect, these are the guys that Mike Flanagan would call meat puppets because it looks like they have handlebars drawn on their chest because every single time they go into contact, it's like they're running like this. They're trying to do some sort of macho bull rush move. And every one of our guys just locked out and can hold them as long as they want. So Royce is improving. I'd still like him to see, be a more physical player, but like we're nitpicking, right? Because he is a rookie. Like he's so much, if I just put him on template on my career, like he's so much further ahead than I was. What are we even talking about? But I was really happy to see these guys improve. Generally, Andy, I would say that when you're missing 4 starting offensive linemen and you're playing at a level where nobody's really talking about you. And right. We know that they have Aaron Rodgers. So it's like, let's just shelf it. We know it, but they're playing at such a high level. I love the way they're competing. The way that they're calling plays really meshes in well with their personnel on the offensive line and obviously the running backs, everything that they have. And then you've got a guy like Mercedes Lewis. I always want to bring up because when we talk about who's the best blocker on the team, it's Mercedes Lewis right now. Until Bakhtiari gets back, maybe Elgin gets back. He's the best guy on the team. So I love what Royce is doing. I'm really excited to see his development. Certainly, I've mentioned before, Stanovich is just doing a really masterful job. I think of all 5 of those guys right now coming in and being able to play the position at a high level.
I want to ask you about that because you mentioned Aaron Donald last week, and it's guys like Bilal Nichols and things like that. No disrespect to them; they've actually had some really good games against the Packers in the past. But when you're getting feedback from your coaches, or maybe when you're giving the feedback, how much do you take into account of that? Do you say like, listen, you had a rough day at the office, but I understand Aaron Donald was against you. So you know what, we're just going to, pretend that didn't happen. Or, how do you sort of, I'm assuming that you're focused on what they did as the individual and was their pass that's good and so those sort of things. Yeah. But how much do you attribute to like, all right, you had Aaron Donald, we get it. We're going to go on to next week.
So I think what we try to do is always focus on the process. Like the outcome of it is really dependent on 21 other players, where they, the calls, the positioning, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't really want to focus on the outcome. We know that the opponent is who he is. In other words, we know that a really good game against Aaron Donald looks completely different than a really good game against either of these guys for the Chicago Bears. So there is a kind of a sliding scale, but you really want to focus on the process of how you do everything. And to Royce's credit, John Runyon Jr. is a guy I've been super high on for the last, 8 weeks.
Sure.
And I think that Royce outplayed him this week. You see John Runyon Jr. kind of standing up a little bit higher and getting pushed back, taking some bull rushes, not as well as he was maybe earlier in the season. It's just one of those things. Maybe he had an off week. I'm sure he'll bounce, snap back next week, being a little more physical in the run game. But the Packers in a game like this, understand that Aaron Donald's not on the field and Mac is not there. And really, Robert Quinn is a special player, but really only one guy has to deal with him. You look at the other 3 or 4 defensive linemen against our 4 offensive linemen. And what the Packers are doing really, really well is not getting beat on easy stuff. Like the Chicago Bears run terrible games. Their TTs, their TEs, their ETs are honestly, they're awful. They're like grade school awful, the way that they run them. And I don't know why they do that, but thank you for doing it. But the Packers aren't getting beat on easy stuff. Like we continue to do well on our double teams. We continue to do well on our leverage blocks, and we continue to, keep trying to fight that push when we single block and work on those games. So there is a differentiation when you're playing against a top player. And the real thing is when you're playing against competition that you should be beating, can you beat them consistently and then not get beat on the easy stuff?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. As I'm only through about a quarter and a half of the offense so far of grading everything, but and just kind of reviewing everything. But there were a couple twists and stunts by Chicago that took so dang long, where I was like, what were they trying to accomplish on this play? The loops and just everything was just so elongated. It was really odd, and I didn't have a chance to really. I was focused on what Green Bay was doing just in their protection and stuff. I didn't have a chance to look at what Chicago was doing. But it's interesting you say that, because there were already a couple of those that flashed on tape where I was just like, "What the heck was that?"
Wait until the second half.
Oh, fun. I can't wait.
The second half. I mean, if I'm a Chicago Bears fan, it's like, when did you lose the team? Second half of this game. The second half of the game, especially from a defensive standpoint, the demeanor of the defense completely, it's like they didn't come out at halftime. And, whether they're deflated because they lost a 10-point lead, whatever the case may be. Certainly, that drive going down in the first drive of the third quarter for the Packers, where they don't even have like a zero play. They all have all positive plays and go into the end zone.
Right.
That was a defeated team on the field, and you could see the demeanor. Even if some of their top players, their demeanor completely changed. And so, you start asking kind of the bigger questions about, have they lost the locker room? What does that look like? It was very problematic.
Have you ever seen a team lose 4 of its top 5 offensive linemen before? Because that seems insane. And to your point, credit Adam Stenavich again, because he's done a tremendous job getting these guys ready.
Yeah. So the only thing I can remember, I remember, I think it happened once in Carolina when we lost 3 guys, but my last year in football, I had to go on IR, but all 5 of our offensive linemen were on IR. We're actually sitting. So it's, Walter Jones, Rob Sims, all these guys were sitting in the training room, all getting treatment. And, we're still offensive linemen. We're all shooting the breeze and having fun with the trainers. And I remember Hasselbeck's in there. And he needs to go on IR. Like, he's messed up, right? His body is physically hurt, but we're all on IR. And Holmgren walks in and he just looks at us with like this, "You guys are pieces of garbage" look on his face, And he walks over to Hasselbeck, and I don't want to directly quote him, but he says something to the effect of like, "You're the only thing making this worthwhile." and so Matt's like, "All right, coach." And so, of course, Matt, finished out the season, and, we had a terrible year that year, but it does happen, but you usually don't respond in the way that responded. So again, hats off to not only the players, but obviously the coaching staff.
Yeah, very, very much so. Let's head to the other side of the trenches, because 2 players I wanted to highlight who I think have had struggles in the past. I think last year struggled. I think earlier this year, I thought Kingsley Keke first few weeks really struggled to hold up at the point of attack. What Dean Lowry and Kingsley Keke have been doing really the last month, maybe even 2 months of the season, has looked night and day different to me, at least from what was on film earlier in the year. And even going back to last year, these guys are playing really good football. I'm enjoying how they are pressuring pockets, resetting line of scrimmages, getting into the backfield. It's not going to look, always the same as what a Kenny Clark is doing. Most people can't do that, but it's really been complementary football to what Kenny's doing, Preston's doing. And it's really just team defense. And I'm really enjoying those 2 specifically, and how, in my opinion, and they've sort of turned their seasons around and are performing the way that they are.
Yeah, I've loved Dean Lowry from the jump this year. I just think he's played at an extremely high level. He was my player of the game a couple of games earlier in the season. I just like the way he pushes the pocket. And both those guys, they know their role. They're not playing outside of their abilities. Like you said, they're not Kenny Clark. They're not Preston Smith. They're certainly not Gary, but they understand that, especially against the players that they're playing against right now, like interior line of the Chicago Bears is a great example. They're going to be a good interior offensive line, but they're young right now, right? So you can get push on the pocket. You can run games. You can do all these things where they're not going to be able to switch off. And so they're doing a great job of creating pressure in 1v1 matchups. And they're also, from a scheme standpoint, I think recently they're putting in, whether it's Campbell walking up on the center or whether they're lining up in a jam look, we're putting them in 1v1 situations, knowing that they're very, very good in the run game, winning 1v1, or at least pressing and holding the line of scrimmage for stack and shed. And they're doing a good job of pressing the pocket on a 1v1 pass rush. Lowry can stack and shed all day. And I think Keke's a little bit of a longer stride guy. And so he has, both of them kind of end up in too many situations for me where you end up talling in the bull rush. Like I still would like him to see pressing edges and kind of working the edges of pass rushes a little bit more, but they play fast to the ball. I love how they play technique on the backside runs. And I think you saw the double swipe on Keke yesterday. We got an early pressure on Justin Fields, on Monday night. Great pass rush move. They're only getting better. And as they get more comfortable in that situation, understanding their role, understanding how they're going to be really impactful on this defense, I think you're just going to continue to see those guys grow.
Yeah, no, I was really excited. There were a couple quick wins for Keke in that game. And again, Dean's going to be a little bit of a slower burn guy, but working through guys. But man, their ability to hold up at the point of attack has been night and day. I don't think the run defense has gotten quite the pub. If I remember correctly, I don't believe they've given up a 100-yard rusher so far on the entirety of this season. And they're just playing really good. You go back to the San Francisco game in the NFC Championship 2 years ago, where they just couldn't hold up. I mean, I don't think San Francisco needed to throw a pass in that game legitimately. I think they could have ran every play and won in the NFC Championship game. And now they're holding up at the point of attack against some really good running backs, some really good running games. And it's just a night and day difference.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that stands out to me is, what is the trend in the National Football League with all these high-powered offenses is to run like a too high, play everybody super deep as safeties. And so you're giving up that box look where you're not having 8 in the box anymore, not even having 7 in the box anymore when you go in nickel. We're creating, for the most part, pressure with four rushers. So we could still play these different looks and kind of maximize our underneath pass protection. And when you're able to create the pressure at the pass rush, knowing that we do have Aaron Rodgers, we do score a lot of points, right? And we burn so much clock on offense that these guys are kind of feeling the pressure that they have to get out there and score at some point in the game. It's when you talk about complementary football and what we're doing, the fact that we can play with 4 guys in front that are creating defensive pressure allows our safeties to play super deep, allows our corners to play off and play at the sticks, allows our linebackers to play underneath coverage. Everything is just working really, really well right now because guys like Lowry, guys like Keke are doing their job, just creating that pressure up the middle.
I think I kind of know the answer to this question, but I want to ask you anyway, because I think your insight's going to be really intriguing. But how different is your job when you are one-dimensional and the other team knows it's going to be a pass versus when you have run pass option and the other team doesn't know what's coming?
Yeah, it's the worst feeling in the world to have to drop back like 70 times a game. I think the head coach for the Rams the Chargers answered this. Brandon Staley answered this the best way. Yeah. You really just need to be able to keep the defensive line honest. And everybody thinks it's about because we're so into statistics now, and PFF has all these, analytics that we try to make, we try to postulate some claims on validity with, the main reason that you run the football is so that these guys can't tee off. It allows your offense to be aggressive. It gives you multiple looks. It gives you multiple formations that you can have success out of in different ways. You can't just line up in a kind of what we just call a racehorse stance from the defensive perspective and tee off every time. Linebackers can't get into their drops early. They can't be comfortable showing their dogs or blitzes early. Complementary football is so important, not just at the offensive and defensive line level, but really what you look at from 11 versus 11, what we're bringing to the table, what the safeties have to do, what the cornerbacks have to do from coming up and playing the run perspective. Like you saw early in the game, the 2 kick plays we ran early. Now I know that Roquan Smith sniffed out the second one, but Aaron Jones comes out the backside of that kick play. We did a slightly different formation. We've been running that play in the NFL for the last 15 years. It's been a bread and butter play for most teams. And what are they basically saying? They're basically saying that the cornerback has to come up and make a tackle at the line of scrimmage. And my running back is either going to make him miss because he's not a willing tackler unless his name is Richard Sherman or Jalen Ramsey. Fair enough, right? Or I'm going to drag him for 5 yards because his angle's poor. And they've been running that over and over and over for 15 years because the cornerbacks really don't want to step and play the run. Like Deion Sanders, what did he want to tell you? Man, I'm not here to play the run. I'm here to break up passes, right? And get picks. Yep. So you need, from an 11v11 standpoint, the whole demeanor of your offense changes when you're able to add that physical moving forward, being the aggressor, part of your game, phase of your game, as opposed to always just dropping back.
Yeah. And I think, score and having Aaron Rodgers, there's so many things that go into that, because you can tell teams do feel more pressure to have to put up points against Rodgers and the Packers, and Favre and the Packers has been happening for a long time. And it's an underrated aspect of the sort of inherent advantage that you have when you have one of those quarterbacks going into the game, because when Green Bay gets up 7-0 or gets up early, it just puts so much pressure on the opposing offense to be like, we got to score right away, because if we don't, Green Bay is going to get the ball back and it's going to be a 2-score game. And like the rest is just going to be trying to play catch up from there. It immediately sets that tone and expectation. And I know it didn't happen in this game, but as you mentioned, second half, all of a sudden Green Bay does get that 8-point lead, and you could see things change. And then Justin Fields had to be the more of a pocket pass, and it just, everything very quickly fell apart for Chicago.
Yeah. And if you really think about how this game played out, and you look at the personnel they use and kind of the gimmick stuff that they were doing on the Chicago side, when you're in a situation where you don't trust that your offense can generate offense against the Green Bay Packers, because you only average like 16.8 points a game or something. I mean, right. The offense for the Chicago Bears isn't very good, right? So they kind of pulled out all the stops. I mean, you kind of know the game's over when they run the Wildcat in the second play of the game or whatever it was, right? Because you just, all of a sudden you go, okay, they're actually, from a defensive standpoint, from a team standpoint, it's the same as watching a defense stunt their defensive linemen all the time or start bringing a lot of pressure. They're basically saying, we can't hold up, or we're not going to be able, in the offensive side, we're not going to be able to score points. We're not going to be able to hang with you if we do things the traditional way. So even though, and that's why I think when they were down 10 points, you don't really see a lot of panic. I mean, you didn't feel it from the announcers all the way down to the field, right? And it's because they're going to run out of those plays. And once they did in the second half, like, they have nothing else to offer, because you've kind of told your team, not only are you not good enough to play against that team, I think, man for man, but you've also told your team, subliminally through the plays that you've been calling, like, we know that we're not good enough to play against them. So now that we have nothing left, like, what are we supposed to do? That's a really, really disheartening feeling from an offensive perspective.
And you can tell, again, I hate to keep harping back on this, but like the difference in first and second half, right? First half, they gave a bunch of unscouted looks, and then you run in the reverse with Jakeem Grant. Of course, you had some special teams miscues, but you can tell they threw the kitchen sink in the first half. They got some big plays out of it. That another angle route on the backfield against Henry Black, which has been a struggle these last couple of weeks, but they threw all that stuff at him in the second half when it was all the bells and whistles were gone. And now you just had to play offense. It was game over. They couldn't do anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's jump to the defensive side of the ball. I want you to talk me off the ledge on this one. And maybe talking off the ledge is a bit harsh here, but I struggle sometimes with Darnell Savage at safety. I think he's a good player. I want to start off by saying that. I don't think this is a situation where you've got just this player that is out at safety and like you can consistently attack him or things like that. But there's things that from a first round safety, whatever, from Darnell Savage, where I just want him to see maybe some better angles from time to time. There are just some areas where at this point in his career, I've expected him maybe to take that step and to maybe be something a little bit more than what he is right now. Maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time. It'll happen many times in the future. But what are you seeing out of Darnell Savage? There's some really good things he does, but there's some things every once in a while where I just go, what the heck was that?
Yeah, and I'm sure at least one of the things you're referencing is like his angle on Jakeem Grant's touchdown is absurd, right? And then he has a wide open sack, and it's like, if you're the smaller guy, you can't miss that bad, right? That's kind of that's your only advantage, is that you should be shiftier, quicker, be able to break down and make a shoulder to hip contact on that a potential sack instead of getting thrown off. But for me, Darnell Savage is playing the scheme that he's being requested to play. he's not a Harrison Smith. Right. He is not. What's the guy's name from the Denver Broncos? The phenomenal
Justin Simmons.
He is not those guys. He's a barely maybe 200-pound wet safety. He's not going to come up and hit. He doesn't record a lot of tackles. But what he's done extremely well this year is he has not let people beat him deep. Right. He's letting people play in front of him. And just the philosophy of the defense is we can rush 4, we can play these guys deep. And most teams are not going to be able to take us down the field on 12-play drives, 15-play drives. I don't like the angles that he takes. I think that's just, there's a bunch of different things. He's one of those guys that you would call a pile inspector, right? Like he kind of shows up at the end of plays around piles. He's not really making a ton of tackles. Right. He had a handful of tackles. He had one on Komet. He had one later in the game. So maybe he's a 2-tackle guy this week with a couple misses. And, then he's around a lot of piles at the end. Like if he was playing in the 90s, 2000s, he's getting picked off a lot for just kind of standing around those piles, right? That was kind of the big thing when we were playing, back in the day. But I think with the way that this defense is playing, the way that our offense scores points, they're just saying, listen, play deep. I mean, every single pass play, he gets minimum 20 yards deep on his drop, play action, or, he's minimum 20 yards. So don't get beat deep, play with people in front of you. And so much of what a free safety does is kind of that dance with the quarterback, like taking away that quarterback's first or second read. And from that perspective, if you watch the tape, there was a couple crossing routes that he missed that unfortunately for the Bears, we just got pressure on. But he is doing a pretty good job of that part of it. It just kind of goes unseen, right? Because the truth is he's not making a lot of tackles, so it doesn't look like he's having a lot of impact on the defense.
And it's I'm glad that you brought that up, because I feel like sometimes, especially when you have those safeties that are playing 20 yards deep, right, and really heading back, you watch and there will be, it's like a second baseman or a third baseman in baseball who just went like 7 innings and didn't see the ball come to them one time, right? Like you're going to have stretches of play where you don't notice Darnell Savage at all because he's way in the back and it's all underneath stuff or running plays. And by the time he even gets up to the pile, the play is basically over from time to time. And then all of a sudden, when you are needed, it's like, all right, of course it's, bases loaded, your best, hitters coming up to the plate and you just got the toughest hop at shortstop. And now you have to field it and you haven't seen a ball in 7 innings, whatever the case may be. That's what it can be like for a safety sometimes, where you go play after play after play, nothing's happening. And now all of a sudden you have to make this really big play on the ball, whether it's ranging to a different side of the field, whether it's making a touchdown saving tackle. So those things are all super important. It can be tough to kind of, I think, probably gain some of that rhythm and flow within the defense, but a lot of things he's doing well. He's playing safe more often than not. Just every once in a while, there'll be a coverage or a blitz or an angle. And you're just like, whoa, that just didn't seem right. But again, I don't think it's anything where you're super concerned about it. Just wish he was able to clean a couple of those things up by this point in his career.
Even on defense, there's guys, and I'm not saying this about Savage, but even as defensive players, you will meet guys who don't really like contact. And they somehow find a way to avoid it as often as possible, right? And I'm not saying that's him, but when you have a tendency to miss that tackle on the sack, when you have the tendency to underrun Jakeem Grant on the around, it gets me thinking, like, are you one of those? And even some of the tackles that were, you're kind of the second, third guy in, like you're not knocking the guy out. Rodney Harrison knocks that guy out every time, right? Jamal Adams, who I don't even call, he's not really a safety. I don't know what position he plays, he's a 220-pound, like he's an absolute unit, and he's knocking that dude out. There's Harrison Smith's knocking that dude out. So there's just different styles of play, and I think as a fan, we would prefer to see the violence. Like we'd prefer to see the big hit. We'd prefer to see him come up and be a physical enforcer because we see that as part of the position. And he's just not that guy. So I think it's really tough to appreciate some of the good stuff that he's doing on a night in, night out basis.
I think that's a really great point. And I certainly appreciate that. And again, no way, shape or form is he a bad player. Just a couple of things would love to see cleaned up here and there, but still this defense as a whole playing really nice football. And he's definitely a part of that. Let's jump to a side that is not playing great football right now. I'm going to ask you this, and I'm going to let you take it in any direction that you want. What makes special teams so challenging, and why has this been an issue for so long in Green Bay?
I honestly don't know what makes it so challenging, to be honest. I mean, it's like you have one job, right? I mean, I don't know where you even want to start. Mason Crosby has done this, at a high level for his entire career. He's obviously having arguably the worst, I know he's had some slumps before, but this just seems like it's just been bad, right? And so at that point, this is where I would call the team psychologist, because there's nothing structurally, there's nothing mechanically that he's doing wrong. It's all upstairs. Like everything's happening above the shoulders. And if you just template that on the rest of the special teams unit, everything bad that is happening right now is just happening above the shoulders. Like they've been coached well. That this is a point of emphasis. You understand that even if you're not doing, like there's teams in there's special teams that are doing some unique trick plays. They have some kind of really kind of creative schemes. And then there's teams that, listen, you have this lane. Sometimes we crisscross. Make sure you're communicating, play as hard as you can, go make the tackle, form tackle when you get there. Like it's not hard, right? It's not difficult. It's simple. It's not easy, but it's a simple task. And so it's just a question of getting yourself in the right position, making your reads, playing at full speed. And I don't understand why we continue to have all of these problems. And I guess like Amari Rodgers, for me, I remember I saw him, early in the year, and he dropped a punt. And I'm like, okay, well, to me, he's done.
Yeah.
If you're a rookie, if he was like an 8-year guy, if it was Julian Edelman or something like that, like coming back and I'm going to, I drop one. It's like, all right, fair enough. You make mistakes. But if you're a rookie and you muff a punt, to me, I don't know if I'm giving you another chance for weeks. Right. Just because that's a position where we need to make sure that is completely solid. I know they put Cobb back there and then he muffed it and you're just going like, okay, it's just one of those deals. I know it's hard to, maybe it's Lambeau, the lights, the wind, I don't know. But the most important thing about special teams is it's literally, what are you getting? 20 plays a game. And you have a situation where every single time you line up, but right before the ball is kicked, it's going to look exactly the same every single time. No matter where you are on the field, you should understand where you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do, who you're supposed to hit. Like all of these things are obvious before the snap. And so it's just a question of translating that, playing as hard as you can, and stop making silly mistakes.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And it's mind-blowing that it's gone on for this long, and it's mind-blowing how poorly it's been this season. But I'm with you. I think part of it's just execution at this point. I do think, there's opportunities for maybe improvement in roster building with putting a little bit more emphasis on special teams, whether that's having a specialist that is like a Matthew Slater, someone like that, whether that is actually having a legitimate returner on your roster. I think those things are important and something that can't just be ignored anymore. But it's all of it right now, and all of it needs to get cleaned up.
When you think about, I just remember when the Patriots were early on in the 2000s, they had a ton of starters on special teams especially when you started going towards playoff time. And it might be time to start, listen, we're just going to fill the special teams roster with our starters, like defensive backs, linebackers, running backs. Get ready. You're tight end. Everybody's in, because we can't afford for this one unit to fail us in a crucial moment. And I think as a fan, as a coach, as anybody who's involved in that organization, that's really what's the number one concern for the Green Bay Packers right now. Like, it's not our pass rush. It's not the health of our offensive line. It's, can our special teams not lose us a game in January? Yeah. That's what we're all concerned about. So maybe that might be the answer. I don't know.
Yeah, Matt LaFleur mentioned potentially all hands on deck, and I think Lazard and Douglas and a couple other guys got mentioned. But Alabama, I know it's college and NFL are different, and you got like a billion-man rosters in college, but Alabama is using their best guys on special teams more often than not. So it's an interesting concept. Obviously, injuries and everything like that plays a part as well. But come playoff time, that's why I asked it facetiously in the press conference. But I facetiously asked, Devontae Adams, hey, can you return a punt? Do you want to return a punt? Is that something that you would advocate for? And he said, could I? Yes. Do I want to? No. Again, it was half joking, but at the same token, if you ask me right now, and I said this the other day as well, but like if all you needed to do to win the game was to catch a punt in fair catch and catch a punt right now, like the guy I'd put back there is Davante Adams. Like, I don't care anything else. Like if he says I can do it and I would trust him more than anyone else. And if he muffed it and dropped it, so be it. I trusted Davante. I feel good about that decision. So again, half jokingly asked it, but I feel like, again, it almost has to be all hands on deck at this point.
Yeah. I think you said two things that I really liked. Is one is anytime Nick Saban does something, I pay attention. Yep. Right. And then two, it's a different situation because Steve started as a special teams guy, but when I played for the Panthers, and when there was anything, if there was either we were playing a good team, it was an important play, or we weren't having the success we wanted on like punt return. Nobody was asking Steve Smith if he would return punts. Steve Smith was returning the punt. Like there wasn't any question. Steve's like, I'll just go ahead and take the rest of these. You guys can go sit down again. You know what I mean? Like it's now my job again. And then he'd go out and do something magical. And, because he's a very unique player, but sometimes you have to have a player take control of that situation, maybe even more so than a coach.
Sure.
If that makes sense. There's the coordinator saying, okay, we're going to try these different things, and they call so-and-so into the office, Davante, maybe, who knows? But then there's the guy who's going to go take charge and say, you know what, enough of this. I'm taking the punts from now on. I'm the guy. Because I'm the guy.
Yep.
And that's how we're going to get to the Super Bowl.
Love it. And I would love to see something like that. All right. Last question. We'll get out of here. Speaking of Davante Adams, he's obviously playing at a ridiculous level, had another couple insane routes this past game. Who is the best wide receiver that you've ever played with? How do they compare to Davante, and what can that do for your offense, having a receiver of that sort of capability?
Yeah, great question. So with respect to Donald Driver, who is a phenomenal Packers all-time great. Steve Smith's one of the best players I've ever played around. Definitely one of the biggest competitors I've ever been around. And Steve's a different cat. First of all, we're playing in a different era. He was so physical. He was such a physical, and he's a small guy, but he was so physically dominant. He was so violent. He was so I'm going to give you a story that it kind of explains Steve Smith in a short time. We're playing Tampa Bay. And we go out and Chris Sims is quarterback. So we know we got it in the bag kind of deal. Right. But we go and we watch tape, and Steve catches a hitch and takes it to the house. And so we're watching tape the next day. And I remember Dan Henning's like, Steve, why are you looking at the safety when you catch the ball? And he goes, where else would I look? I got to make a miss. He goes, what about Rondé Barber, the guy who's covering you? And he goes, Rondé Barber doesn't exist in my world. And it was like, and he didn't,
Rondé Barber too.
Rondé Barber could be a Hall of Famer, right? Like That's how good. And that's just the way he thought. I mean, I remember we went and played. I could tell stories forever. D'Angelo Hall. We went and played in Atlanta. D'Angelo Hall had 2 or 3 personal fouls and pass interference plays in the first 10 minutes of the game for 105 yards. I mean, you just want to talk about a guy who get in your head. I mean, he was such a competitor. He compete over anything. Davante Adams is more of an artist, right? He's more of an artist. The way that he can run routes, he is not afraid to be a physical guy, but the difference in the run game physicality, Steve was a guy who was he was trying to knock heads off. He was just a different cat. It's a different game now, but Davante is an artist. He's a master of his craft. He does every single thing on the field well. There's not a route he can't run. There's not a thing he can't do. There's not a defense he can't read. You put him in situations where they try to run trap on him. He still makes the guy miss. I mean, he's just his body. The play this weekend, when he kind of runs the chair, he catches it and then ducks in real quick, dips back out for the touchdown. People don't understand what a ridiculous amount of body control you have to be able to make that play. Body control is absolutely absurd. When we talk about athletes being genius level brain function, that's why. Right. It's not because we can do math really well, but it's because guys like that, it's because guys like that can run that route, turn around, catch the ball, sidestep without even looking where he's going. Right. And then collect themselves and go into the end zone. It's very, very rare. He's playing at the high level. For me, he's the best wide receiver in the game, but two totally different styles, but very, very effective for both guys. The last part I think you said was, how does that affect the rest of the team? When you have a guy like Steve Smith and you don't have a lot of other weapons, it's kind of a different look, right? Yeah. Where they're kind of trying to take that one player away. I think we saw what happened early in the season when they're trying to take Devontae away, we have so many other weapons, and we have the best quarterback in the world. So he can kind of find, he just knows who's open. There was actually some plays, the first play before Lazard had his touchdown, 2 plays before that, Devontae beats the brakes off that guy man coverage on a slant on the other side, but he goes to the corner, right? Like there's even more plays he could be making if they wanted to target him every play. I think from a wide receiver standpoint, when you're always trying to bracket coverage that guy, you just take away an extra player. I think from an offensive standpoint, once you identify that that's what you're trying to do, then it's like, okay, we can pull some plays out to get him open, whether it's through motion or through different routes. But we also know that all these other guys will single it up now, and you have real problems if you have any talent. And that's what the Packers have done so well this year.
Yeah, he's such a scheme breaker for defenses and how much they have to, pay attention to him, and also his ability to win quickly, helps out your quarterback, helps out your O-line. He makes everything so much easier for the rest of the offense. Mike, amazing. Oh, really quick. Back to Steve Smith just for 1 second. My favorite thing anytime, and like one of my biggest draft isms, is when, if a prospect ever gets compared to Steve Smith, I pretty much like, nope, that guy's not going to work out, because like Steve Smith was such a special competitor and player and feistiness, where it's like, yeah, you can be a smaller receiver that has some of the traits of Steve Smith, but if you didn't have that sort of mentality, they rarely work out. I remember Jeremy Gallon for Michigan. Like, I know he wasn't the same sort of prospect, but some people they rarely work out unless you have that Steve Smith mentality. He was just a special player.
It's funny that you say that, because you think about when people are talking about drafting players, and they always talk about tangibles, and when you find a guy that's a can't miss and he misses, you're like, well, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, because if we kind of have a range of size and weight and speed that we want to use as our model for our team, more often than not, we think we're going to find success. Like, you're playing averages. Right. And Steve Smith kind of falls outside of that, completely. But that's why I think, for me, it's so important to have people in the interview process and in the scouting process who have played the game, who know that position intimately, and kind of are sharks. Like, sharks can smell sharks, right? Lions can smell lions. And when you're in the room with another lion, immediately, if that guy's going to make it, right? Or at least that he's got the personality to push past whatever limitations he might have physically. And that's, I think, where a lot of teams miss out, is they try to just, hey, we're going to slap a Steve Smith label on this kid. It's like, no, dude, you're not. That's not even close to what you are. There's probably 4 people in the United States that are as crazy as he is. I mean, he's just built different. And so you have to have those people in the room that can identify that from a personality standpoint to make up again for the limitations that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Mike, amazing stuff as always. Thanks so much for doing this. We'll probably talk in a few weeks, either 2 or 3, depending upon holiday schedules, but we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Enjoy the next couple games from a Packers standpoint. Make sure to follow Mike on Twitter. Until next time. And as always, everyone, go Pack Go.